over to, I think, Andrew Dismore.
I'm aware, thank you.
So, thank you.
Yeah. Mr Dismore.
Yeah, a year ago at the Economy Committee, Gerard Lyons told us that he'd be publishing a report on London and the EU in January 2014. It's got rather delayed, hasn't it? Last week at the Economy Committee, Mr Lyons told us he gave you a copy of the report on the 17th of July. Have you read it, and when are you going to publish it?
I can tell you, and you can all come. I invite all members of the Assembly, particularly you, Andrew, to an event on August the 6th, where we will be unveiling the report, and I will be talking about the issue in greater depth and detail than you could possibly desire.
Well, perhaps I could ask you about something else that Mr Lyons said at the Economy Committee when I asked him about interest rates. What he said was...
Actually, it'd be wonderful. You should come. You'll enjoy it. It'd be good.
I'm sure I would.
I think we're doing it at Bloomberg in Finsbury Square.
Let's just stop obfuscating. Let's stick to the question of interest rates, which I was going to ask you about. Well, Mr Lyons told us that he would like to see interest rates stay low gradually, but that they should eventually peak at a high level, not a low level. Quote, so I'd sooner have them at 5 or 6% than 2 or 3%. Do you agree with your chief economic advisor that the norm for interest rates should be 5 to 6% when the current economic cycle ends?
Look, I mean, I think what Jerry was saying, well, I'm not entirely certain I would, with greatest possible respect, Andrew, trust you to quote accurately with the substance or indeed the gist of what Jerry was trying to say. I think what he was getting at was that you've got to have monetary policy to suit the needs of the economy. I think in particular, you've got to make sure that you have monetary policy that suits the needs of the whole UK economy. London's circumstances are different from the rest of the UK, and I think Jerry would almost certainly agree, were he here now, that you would not want to whack up interest rates too high too soon. Though clearly you're going to want to be in a position to constrain irrational exuberance.
I don't think I misrepresented what he had to say because I gave you the direct quotes of what he actually said from the transcript.
Well, we all know what wizardry can be done with so-called direct quotes.
I read out the transcript. You seem to be. Are you agreeing or disagreeing with your chief economic advisor? That's the question. Because,
I agree.
Because the impact on Londoners and the London economy of an interest rate of 5 to 6% would be horrendous. The average house price is now £492,000. A rate increase of this scale would double the average mortgage payment in London from around £2,000 a month to £4,300 a month. That is what your economic advisor is advocating at the end of this economic cycle. Do you agree with him or not? Simple question.
What he's urged. I mean, many Londoners would also say that they don't want to see the housing market continuing to get out of control, and I'm not for 1 minute advocating interest rates of 5 or 6% now. I think that would be quite wrong, and it's perfectly obvious from what I'm saying that I think that the state of the economy more broadly needs to be taken into account. And you need to look at the circumstances across the whole country where the recovery is not as strongly embedded as it is in London, and where I think interest rates at that level are frankly uncalled for at the present time. As Jerry Lyons and you know full well, monetary policy has to be kept under constant review, as it is by the Bank of England, to make sure that we deal with any future circumstances that may arise.
Well, I'm not quite sure you're agreeing with him or disagreeing with him, because nobody's saying interest rates.
I'm agreeing.
Let me finish the point. You're agreeing with him, fine, because the Resolution Foundation says that if rates increase to 5% by 2018, the number of households spending more than half of their disposable income on repaying debt could rise from 600,000 today to around 2 million, and that the human and social cost of that would be huge. So you're agreeing, well, at the end of the economic cycle, which is what he says, not now, at the end of the economic cycle, 5 or 6% interest rates are appropriate, and that is the social consequence. You are prepared to accept that?
Interest rates are a matter for the Bank of England and for the Governor and the Court of the Bank of England, and they have, I think, very wisely been steering a course of extreme prudence with regard to interest rates. I think what Mark Carney has been doing is absolutely right. He's been very, very restrained about putting them up. And you're starting to read increasing calls in the newspapers for a hike in interest rates. So I think it is absolutely right to be extremely prudent about the state of some sectors of the UK economy, about areas outside London, and you yourself make a reasonable point about the effect of high interest rates on the London mortgage market. So for all those reasons, I think it is right to be prudent. On the other hand, as Gerard Lyons rightly said, when economic circumstances change, you change your policy.
Okay. Any more questions on question 1? No? Then we'll move on to the next question, which is about the Swiss Cottage Avenue Road development.
Thanks very much, Andrew. I believe this is your question, and I think the crucial point to make is that this is a decision for Camden, and a borough that is not within my control, and indeed the control of the Conservative Party. It is up to them to decide what they want to do, and I would urge local people who feel strongly about this matter to make representations to them.
So, Member Boff.
Thank you, Chair. So, Mr. Mayor, would you therefore, what would be your view of Camden Labour councillors and planners saying to residents that actually the GLA have already decided and it's up to them? What would your be your
complete nonsense? This is absolute flat lie. It is up to, there is a democratic system, everybody knows how the planning process works. Camden Council have responsibility, and they must discharge that responsibility. If they choose to throw out that scheme, that is entirely a matter for them.
And would you, Mr. Mayor, ask for an update on the Stage 1 report that was received by Camden with regard to this application, on the basis that the language within that Stage 1 report inferred that a tall building was preferable?
Yes,
now, that is not the case, and I know that the planners would like to amend that. And would you like to ask for that update as soon as possible?
And to the best of my knowledge, Andrew, it has actually been amended so that what it says is that a tall building is acceptable in that area, given the high P-TAL ratio and so on and so forth. But to repeat, this is a matter for locally elected councillors in Camden. And as far as best of my knowledge, the Labour Party has a majority on that council. If they choose to throw it out, that is entirely their prerogative. If they choose to go ahead with it, that is their decision.
I welcome that, Mr. Mayor, and I also hope that we will no more see any misinterpretations in Stage 1 reports. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Member Dismore.
Thank you. Well, I've got the Stage 1 report here, and it says the Mayor considers that the principle of the development is supported. So you've already approved the building in principle in your Stage 1 report. And if Camden were to refuse it, you'd still force approval of it anyway, wouldn't you? You'd still force the approval of it anyway by calling it in, as you did with Mount Pleasant.
No.
When Camden Let me finish.
No, I won't let you finish. You're talking nonsense.
Wanted to turn down the Mount Pleasant one, you call that in. And you'd do exactly the same thing here, wouldn't you? The least worst option for those who oppose this building is for Camden to impose as many planning conditions as they can on it.
No, Dismore.
On the basis that you would not overturn it. Are you saying you will never call this in then?
Listen,
are you undertaking never to call this in?
I'm not making any commitment on any future planning decision I might make.
Exactly.
You're alleging, if I may say so, quite wrongly, that it is absolutely inevitable that this building will go ahead because I am going to impose it on Camden.
Well, will you undertake not to call it in if Camden refuse it?
Completely
Simple question.
Untrue. What I've said
will you undertake not to call it in if Camden refuse it? Yes or no?
What I've said to Andrew Boff, who asked questions, if I may say so, in a much nicer and more productive
Simple question. Yes or no? Will you undertake not to call it in if Camden refuse it?
This is a planning matter for Camden.
Exactly. Will you call it in if Camden refuse it?
Well,
yes,
let's see what
no?
they do. Let's see what they do. If we had some ham,
So you won't give an answer.
I want to see.
I think people in the area in Swiss Cottage will read that.
I think people in the area want to know what a spineless representative they have in the form of Dismore, who does that. Come on, what is your
clear. You
do
you
have any influence whatever with Camden Council? You protoplasmic jelly. Why don't you? Here
we go again.
If you're so hostile,
Club bully strikes again.
If you're so hostile,
can we just stop for a moment, because we're not treating each other with the respect that we merit, and that goes to some extent with shouting at the mayor as well and provoking him. Have you finished, Mr. Dismore?
Well, it's pretty obvious I'm not going to get a sensible answer to a straightforward question.
Well,
I can give you the answer. The answer is that if the member, Mr. Dismore, objects so vehemently to this scheme, then it is open to him and his fellow members of the Labour Party in Camden to throw it out. That they have, as far as I know, chosen not to do. And I think that people following this debate will want to know why Mr. Dismore's relations with the Labour Party in Camden are so frail and so feeble, even though he purports to represent them, that he cannot persuade them to go against this building. And that seems to me to be the relevant question.
Mr. Duval, you still make... Mr. Boff?
Mr. Mayor, could you acquaint Mr. Dismore with the number of, perhaps write to him, with the number of occasions on which you've called in applications with less than 200 flats? And could you also acquaint him with your role as the planning authority, and that to declare your hand at this stage would effectively make it impossible for you to carry out your role as that planning authority?
Of course. And the member knows full well that if I were to say anything about any future decision, I would thereby fetter my discretion, be subject to judicial review. And the point you rightly make, I think the total number of call-ins is so far fewer than the fingers of one hand, let alone for a scheme that is only a relatively small number of flats. This is a matter for the Labour Party. They are pathetically trying to spread responsibility around. Local democratically elected politicians in Camden have a decision to make, and I don't see any sign of Dismore having any influence. Isn't that a tragedy? I mean, he's been elected to this. He has no influence on this decision whatever.
Well, Mr. Mayor, perhaps you could also find out how he can have spent so long on the London Assembly and not understand the absolute basics of your roles with regard to planning. It's astonishing to me. It sounds like he might have. It sounds like a political game is being played with this.
Well, you know, as I began this morning by saying, you know, I don't think this is the last session.
And no doubt.
This is the last session before I think. You know, I don't ever want.
Because he does on every possible occasion.
This is the last. Sorry, Andrew.
Yeah. But it does sound like, Mr. Mayor, that a political game might be played on this, and that you have reminded us that Camden are the planning authority with regard to this planning application.
Yes, Camden are the planning authority. Dismore is a Labour member. Camden is the Labour Council concerned. It's up to them. We've heard the mutterings of the medium. Let's see the ectoplasm. Let's see what they've got to say about this building.
Right, well, it all seems fairly simple to me, but Mr. Dismore, do you want to make a
I think as I've been personally attacked here, I think I should say I fully understand the planning system. I've been in local government before I came here, and I've been in politics for over 30 years. I fully understand the system. I also understand when people are playing politics with a planning application like the Tories are in Swiss Cottage, and I also have seen what the Mayor does when he calls things in, like he has done in Mount Pleasant, when it's a clear political decision on his part. The fact is, planning decisions are not whip decisions. They're not party political in any local authority. If they were whip, that would make them subject to judicial review. And the fact is the Mayor and Mr Boff are playing politics, as is the Tory party in Swiss Cottage, because that is a marginal constituency that they hope to win.
Perfectly open.
You're expanding the personal explanation envelope a fair bit there.
Results that the Met are achieving.
Assembly Member Dismore.
I'd like to ask about how the new model is performing in relation to emergency calls in Barnet. iCalls, the target is about emergency calls in Barnet, how the new model is performing. Because iCalls in Barnet, the target is supposed to be 15 minutes. In March, April and May, you're averaging against that target around 89%. But the longest call, which was supposed to be 15 minutes, was 79 minutes in March for heavy demand, 60 minutes in April, over 100 minutes in May to attend an emergency call where they're supposed to be there in 15 minutes. For S calls, where they're supposed to be there in 60 minutes, the average, the performance against target was less for March, April and May was less than 88% on average. But again, the longest calls, March over 4,000 minutes, April over 4,000 minutes, May over 2,700 minutes. Do you think it's right that it should take over an hour and a half for a call to be answered that's supposed to be answered in 15 minutes? Nearly 3 days, 69 hours for a call that's supposed to be answered in 60 minutes. The real problem here is, isn't it, that your model's not working for emergencies because there aren't enough police officers in Barnet. As of May 2014, Barnet has 542 officers, 65 fewer than in May 2010, that's 11% fewer. We have 64 PCSOs, 108 fewer than May 2010, and a reduction of 63%. The fact is, we don't have enough officers in Barnet to cover the growing population and the geography of the borough, and that is feeding through into these emergency calls performance. Do you find those times acceptable? No. If not, what are you going to do to give us more police officers so they can make your targets?
Well, I mean, I will certainly study the length of time taken to answer these emergency calls in Barnet to see whether there's a particular problem in Barnet. Obviously,
yeah, just not enough policemen.
The times that you've mentioned are unacceptable, and I will undertake to write to the member to try to give him a full answer as to what we think is going on in the answering of emergency calls in Barnet. But I would just stress that in Barnet and across the whole of London, there are very steep falls in crime.
But not in violent crime, Mr.
And that is
not in violent crime, which has gone up dramatically.
And well, just on that, that is as we had a discussion about this, I think, in the PCC. I don't believe you were there. In which I think, to the satisfaction of the PCC, we were able to show that the rise in violent crime is due to a redesignation of certain types of domestic crime into the violent crime category, and so it's a category change that has produced those figures across the board. You are seeing falls in crime in this city.
We don't have enough police officers, and that's why we can't meet the attendance times.
And the proof of the pudding, as I say, is in the eating. There are steep falls in crime, and I think the police force. If I was in your shoes, I would be congratulating police officers in Barnet on their achievement rather than trying to run them down.
I'm not trying to run them down. I'm challenging you of the poor performance.
I would be congratulating them rather than trying to run them down, because they're serving their community very well. Unlike
Assembly Member Tracy.
Their Assembly Member.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Question is about the London rental standard and its take-up in Barnet, and it's in the name of...
Yes,
Mr.
thank you,
Dismore.
Andrew. The number of landlords sign up to the London rental standard in Barnet is, I think, 448.
Yeah, well, thank you for that.
And obviously we're encouraging everybody to promote the London rental standard, which I think is a great thing for tenants and indeed for the landlords themselves.
Well, I think we established before that councillors who are landlords should set a good example by signing up to the London rental standard. So I don't suppose it would surprise you to know that in addition to Mayor Councillor Rayner, who we've discussed before, 5 other Barnet Conservative councillors who are landlords in the borough, that's Councillor Peter Zinkin, Councillor Dean Cohen, Councillor Melvin Cohen, Councillor Lena Hart, Councillor Con Davey and of course Councillor Rayner, have not only failed to join the scheme, but at the last council meeting secured a dispensation from the council itself to disapply the normal direct pecuniary interest rules to enable them to participate and vote on matters directly related to landlords in the borough. Do you think that's right?
Well, if I may respectfully say to you, Andrew, you've raised the gentleman concern several times now in this place and made a series of allegations about him, which is not some of them have been, I think, allegations of criminal misconduct, and I think if you feel that is the case, then you really must take those up with the police. And my general view about the London rental standard is it is an excellent thing, and I would encourage everybody to sign up to it if they possibly can.
Okay. Well, if it's so important and so successful, do you think it's time for us also to have a rental standard code of practice for landlords of commercial properties, especially in light of what's happening as a result of the new permitted development rights introduced by your government, which allow change from office to residential use? I'll give you a couple of examples. In Camden, the Camden Town bid set up 100 young entrepreneurs at Carlow House in Camden Town. 500 people work there. They've all been evicted from the building so it can be converted into flats. On Monday, I met with businesses in Premier House in Edgware. There are 150 individual businesses, charities, other SMEs based there. There are over 400 staff between them. They've just been told to get out, some with only 4 weeks' notice, so the landlord can convert the building into flats at the suggestion of Barnet Council. For example, Mr Heyman runs a chartered accountants, employs 4 people and has been in there for 13 years. Mr Shah runs an import business. He's been in Premier House for 18 years. He employs 11 people, yet he's been given just 4 weeks to leave. What help do you think we should have a rental standard for these business premises? But more importantly, what help can you offer these SMEs to either persuade the landlord not to evict them, or otherwise to help them out in their particular difficulties, trying to relocate in the area? But unfortunately, office space there is in short supply, and the premiums of office rents have gone up precisely because of this building being turned into flats. Do you think it's time for the government to rethink this and not allow evictions of long-established businesses, but only perhaps convert empty office blocks? But more importantly, what are you going to do for these people who are about to be thrown out of their livelihoods?
Well, I've certainly studied the case that you mentioned, and I'm generally I share your concerns about the temptation to try to solve the housing crisis by turning too much of London's employment space, London's office space, into residential. And I think many boroughs are concerned about this now, and I think it's entirely proper that they should be concerned. We need to make sure that London retains substantial supplies of space for economic activity. And I can't give you a top of the head answer to the precise
will you agree
problem that you raise in Barnet. But generally speaking, we have two simultaneous. We have a housing crisis, and it may well be that there is an argument in some cases for turning disused office space. And you see it around.
But just
finish the answer. I can give you a general answer. If you look at there are schemes I've seen in Croydon where very much underused office space has been turned into residential quite successfly.
Yeah, but the point is here,
it will not always be wrong.
This is not disused office space.
But you've got to be very careful.
This is office space used by long-established businesses of 15, 18 or more years. Will you meet a deputation from the the people who run the businesses in Premier House to discuss their problem with you and see what you can do to help?
Well, I think it's a matter for Barnet Council, and I suggest that you take it up with Barnet Council and see what you can do to sort it out.
Doing. But they would also like to know what you can do to help. You said you look into it. Will you meet, or will you ask one of your senior officers to meet?
I will invite you, as a member of the Assembly, to meet with Barnet Council. And I would urge you, as a member of the Assembly, to meet with Barnet Council as fast as possible to see what they can do to sort out the problem.
See what you can do.
And I would not want to interfere with the relationship between you and Barnet Council, which I understand is obviously very close and very strong. And I would like to encourage you, Andrew, to do your job and
will you do your job and to
see what you can do
and see what you can do to help these people.
You can do to sort out this problem rather than raising it frequently and pointlessly and endlessly trying to attack the reputations in this place of people who are not members of this place, who have no ability to defend themselves
I'm
in this
asking
place,
you,
and who you have several times now. You used your position as an elected member, which I know that everybody rejoices in your membership of this Assembly, Andrew, and even more rejoiced at the prospect of your departure from this Assembly to become a member of Parliament. And whereas contrary-wise, there are Labour members of Parliament who rejoice in the prospect of your continuing membership of this Assembly. On the other hand, it is up to you to see what you can do with Barnet Council to sort it out.
But will you help?
I will help by urging you to repair your damaged relations with Barnet Council by doing what you can to help in the case concerned.
Right. Assemblyman. The next question is in the name of Andrew Dismore. It's about race claims against the police.
Thank you, Andrew. Yes, you did. You did ask a series of questions, and I agree with you that it did take too long to answer. That wasn't because I think of any reluctance on the part of the MOPAC to get the details to you, but it did involve an awful lot of collating bits of paper, some of which was stored in Derbyshire in salt mines or whatever. It was some inaccessible place, and it did take a long time. We did finally get you, I think, on June the 9th. The Deputy Assistant Commissioner Fiona Taylor wrote to you, providing all the details that you wanted, and you did ask a great many questions, and I hope that the answer is illuminating. What we were able to show you was that within a 3-year, you asked a series of questions about how many cases there had been of involving racial discrimination. I think it was, and we were able to show that there were 34 such cases. That the cost of settling the cases was 179,078p. The cost of answering your questions, by the way, was about £1 million. So that may give you some.
Well, in fact, Mr. Mayor, that's not quite right. Not the £1 million. I'm sure it wasn't £1 million, but in fact, there were 34 internal cases, which cost 196,000 just over pounds to settle. There were 33 involving the public, which cost £469,000 to settle. There were a total 67 cases. Total compensation was just a whisker short of £666,000. But the key problem here was that only one resulted in any disciplinary action at all, and that was just a first written warning, a little more than a slap on the wrist. But what I was going to ask you was this. I'm going to ask this question again at Mayor's question time for the year 2013-14, which is just finished. So you know it's coming. How long do you think I'm going to have to wait for an answer in September?
I'm sorry, could you ask, what's the question?
I'm going to ask you the same question again. For 2013-14, how many cases have there been? How much has been spent in compensation? How many have been subject to disciplinary action? How long do you think it's going to take me to get an answer?
Well, I hope we'll be able to get an answer as fast as possible. If you are going to ask, as far as I can make out, you asked 219 questions on policing last year alone, 21% of all the questions asked by the Assembly altogether. We've done our best to satisfy you on all the questions that you've posed, and I've given you you've had quite a full answer about the employment tribunal cases. I don't know what conclusions that you've been able to draw about.
Well, the conclusion I've drawn is that the Met doesn't take race issues very seriously. If anyone's resulted in disciplinary action, you had 67 cases, you paid out £666,000.
Well,
if you're telling me you can't say what the numbers are going to be for 2013-14, then I think it's a pretty poor show.
I think that's extremely unfair on the Met. The Met takes racism extremely seriously, and we stamp it out wherever we possibly can, wherever the police possibly can, and I reject that. But I think you've had the data that you sought. It's cost a considerable amount to produce it. I don't believe for a second that you can draw that conclusion. Well, I was told yesterday in my briefing that it cost about £1 million. These are a very considerable number of questions that were
That's ridiculous.
Ridiculous.
Oh, rubbish.
Are we finished with this question?
That's absolute rubbish.
Okay. Can I take the opportunity to welcome the